Welcome, Internet, to Psychologist Casual Review. And today I wanted to talk about a very interesting yet quite short article written by Joyce Mcdougall. Anyway, in her essay, which is entitled The Psychological Economy of Addiction, which in French is L'économie psychique de l'addiction, I found that to be very enlightening, mainly in terms of the thought processes and the relationship between addiction and the psyche. And she, in this article, develops a lot of interesting ideas. The first is that there's a fundamental difference between how, etymologically speaking, the word addiction works in English and in French. In French, it's toxicomane, right? So it's addict, the literal translation, but in terms of etymology, toxicomane refers to someone that enjoys, in a pleasureful way, his toxic, his object of dependency. Whereas addict in English comes from addictum in Latin, which means slave. That means the person is enslaved to his addiction. And how she feels that toxicomane, basically the French term, does not represent fully the truth of what she perceived in her patients, of what she felt was the meaning behind addiction. Because for her, addiction is correlated to many sins. The first and foremost is that she felt that it was not there at the very beginning for no reason. There's always a reason behind the addiction. And that reason is a psychological reason, and it has its own economy. So here, economy is not to understand as like an economical state, but in terms of like the energy the psyche puts in. And she says that the first and foremost, the big point of a drug, of an abusive substance, but here she uses the word addiction, but it can be food, it can be cigarettes, it can be, of course, drugs like heroin, cocaine, and so on and so forth, and also smoking. So it's a whole plethora. She doesn't distinguish any subcategories, at least not in this article. So the main idea is that basically the drugs are there to prevent the thoughts, the processes of displeasure that can be linked to thinking and emotions, meaning that instead of dealing with emotions, the person is going to go into drug addiction, or at least using and abusing the drug in order to prevent, to cut off the emotional process, meaning that instead of feeling, there's something else. There's something that gives them a sense of empowerment and of pleasure at the same time, meaning that it's a substitute for the experience in a way. And she goes on to explain that these substitutes are also linked in terms of the psyche when the addiction is severe, regardless of the, object of the addiction, meaning regardless of if it's cocaine, cigarettes, and so on and so forth. The whole point is that basically this whole drug system in the psyche is what she calls linked to neo-needs. So what are neo-needs? So she feels that as infants, those people were not cared in the right way. They were not, in a way, loved and nurtured in the way they should have been. So she explicitly singles out the mother as the mother doesn't care, did not help them, or even saw herself into the baby rather than letting the baby see himself into her. So that they project their sense of self onto the baby, making the baby, which will be the future patient, an extension of the mother. So those are very interesting ideas, and in a way, because their needs were never met, they create another type of need, what she calls a neo-need, meaning something new, a new need to fulfill something that never was, but could have been. So for her, those neo-needs find their fulfillment within the addiction. The addiction is there to fulfill what should have been. That's basically it. And in that moment, it's a way for the patient to both feel a sense of control through the, let's say, through the object of addiction, like, for example, let's say cigarettes, in a way, it's a way for the patient to feel that the patient is in control, that they can both abandon the bad parent, the bad imago, and also use them as basically the drug encompasses both the very good aspects of the parent and the very bad ones at the same time, and meaning that they have a full control over the drug, but the drug also has control over them. That's where it backfires, is the addiction becomes so strong and so powerful that it reproduces this bad pattern of bad in the sense of like emotionally taxing and hard, where the drug is going to take away at the person, chip away at them in a way. And the drug is also a way of trying to find a lost paradise, meaning what should have been there, in a way of like, let's say, an idealized version of the needs that should have been met. Or that's where the drug comes in to try and reinstate, even if it's very short, that moment of euphoria, of feeling cared for and loved. And that's something that I found very, very interesting, that this idea that the drug, in a way, is, of course, it's pleasure-seeking, but it's not just pleasure-seeking. It's there to compensate a disastrous relationship. In a way, it makes me feel that she's, like, on the same page as Fernburn, that in a way it's because the relationship went badly that they have to go to those neo-needs. And she calls those neo-needs, very interestingly, transitioning objects, which are not the same as transitional objects. In French it says transitoire, which basically is transitioning, because it's using the body instead of the mind, meaning that those patients do not have the ability to be alone in the presence of the mother, that they cannot symbolize their aloneness. So they have to use their body as a way of discharging those affects, which is very interesting. I mean, I feel that I'm all for those subcategories. So, transitioning objects. And that means that basically for the psyche, it's both a way of control and a way of gaining pleasure. And that brings us to a next point, that basically she gives out many, many examples of patients that basically are afraid when they come to her as a psychoanalysis, that she might be able to control them. And she explained very well that fear of control is projected onto her, but it's their will to control others, like they control their drug addiction. I mean, when I'm in control, I don't mean it in a conscious level, but like they use the object. The object is literally used and controlled. They handle it in their way, like in a literal sense. But they're also afraid that the analysts might do the same to them, handle them, or like model them. And that's what they're afraid of, that the analyst has that much power, because that's how much power they project into others, which is very, very interesting, that link between the supposed power of the analyst and the drug addiction. In a way that drug addiction is so powerful that it's also projected in the outside world as something that's destructive and almighty in a way. And she also points out very interestingly that in the underlyingness of the drug, there's also the absence of a father figure, of a third party. And that's very interesting, because it sends us back to the idea of an Oedipal complex, but not really, because basically the father is not there, or if he's there, he's not really a third party, meaning he's absent, he's overworked, he doesn't really play a role in the development of the child. And the child is left with a mother that is both, in a way, a devouring mother, because that's also what they're afraid of, is being devoured and devouring. So there's no one to split off from those anxieties. So that's in the case of very severe drug addiction, not necessarily your day-to-day addiction with cigarettes or video games. I mean, if it's not too extreme. The whole point is that there's degrees, which she does say that the drug can help with neurotic anxieties sometimes, but it's not to the same extent. And what we're talking about here, what I'm talking about, and I mean the father isn't there, does not play a role, it's more for more severe forms of drug addiction. In those more severe drug addictions, she does say that in a way it's both a way of trying to call out for a father figure by the absence. I mean, by abusing the drug, it's also a way to try and find some limits. But it's also sometimes an identification, i.e., father could have been himself a heavy smoker or addict to alcohol and so on and so forth. So it's in a way, it condenses the drug, both parents, good, bad, mainly bad, but not only, and it's also pleasurable. So these three sins that are always on the horizon with the drug addiction. I mean, it's very hard, even psychically, let alone biologically, right? But even psychically, to detach oneself from the drug implies that one can detach themselves from the internalized images of their parents, and to detach themselves of the ideal of the care they should have gotten when they were very, very young. And basically, those are very interesting ideas that I feel should be on the forefront of our thinking when we think about addiction. And when I mean addiction, like Mcdougall, I feel that it's all forms of addiction, not just the more severe, but also the slighter ones. That idea that it's there to prevent emotions, to have a mastery on emotions and on others and on oneself, that's very interesting. And I found it clinically very pertinent in terms of an idea. So that ends it here for me, because I don't think I have anything else said. So I wanted to wish you a good day, and if you want to leave a comment, please feel free to do so. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.